I'm a political science major, and now I'm just a political philosophy and theory junkie. So
Uh,
just keeping up on all the new updates.
yep, yeah, that's great. And Brendan, what brings you here?
Yeah, just looking to learn a little bit about what it is. I don't know anything about it, so
Okay.
just dropping in, really.
Okay. Well, I think because we're such a small group, maybe we can keep it pretty informal and just direct it directly to what your interests are. And I can, go into a little bit of the history of liquid democracy if you want, and some of the projects that have, been trying to move us towards it. And there's some current projects that are in development, including the one that I'm building. And I think the most important thing to realize is that it's sort of what we decide it is. It doesn't have a lot of formal structure to it. It's sort of a new field, and so there's a lot of ways that it can be done. And I think if we welcome. We're having a little sort of informal chat here. So if more people come in, I'll jump into a more formal presentation. But if it's a small group, then I'll be happy to sort of just talk about this in whatever way the group would prefer. And we've done a little bit of a check-in with Tanner, who's a political science major and moving into political philosophy. And Brendan hasn't stated much. He's just sort of curious about it. I'd be curious to hear Grace and James, sort of what brings you to this chat.
I'm like a 4B fanboy, and wherever Sam is where I go.
Well, that's funny. I'm the same way with you. So we're
I
just,
know, it's like I haven't seen you since yesterday.
I know, gosh. And James and Captain Future, curious to hear about what brought you in.
I'm just
And
curious right now to listen what you're gonna say.
I just want to
yeah,
say that, like, I'm not sure that 4B is a form of liquid democracy, but I'm excited to find out why you think it is.
it's not yet, but that's where we're going, and I'll explain why. And James, curious to hear what brings you here.
Curiosity, wanting to learn, and I don't know, is anybody else? I'm getting like kind of a loud hissing noise in the background of
I
the
am as
audio.
well.
I think
Curious
that's
about that.
me. Yeah. Once
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah, that's
much
gone.
better.
Yeah. Whew, that lowers my background or relaxes me.
Yeah, yeah, me as well. And I'm calling from an island off the coast of Madagascar, so I apologize if there seems like there's really no delay here, which is kind of cool. So is everybody really familiar with liquid democracy, or should I just start from the top? Okay, enough people don't seem to know about it. This is a concept that it's been sort of percolating and building as an idea. And the concept is that instead of politicians, you can delegate to anybody else in the network. So any other citizen or member directly. So you can delegate to them and undelegate instantly. And the variations on that are a lot, but the one that we're kind of working towards is that you can delegate at various scales. So you can delegate everything, like, if I'm a member of the liquid democracy of the United States, for example, I could delegate everything, every type of decision in the United States to Grace, for example. And so whatever decision she makes, she gets 2 votes instead of 1. But she can also delegate onward. So you can delegate the whole thing, or you can delegate in terms of areas of expertise. And so that's kind of how we're focusing. So you could consider economics or the environment or agriculture or defense or cybersecurity or health. Think of all the departments of the United States government. Those are ultimately sort of areas of expertise according to the way we're modeling it. So I can delegate decisions that have to do with defense to a different person. I could delegate them to James, and maybe Captain Future is into agriculture, so I might delegate every agriculture decision to him. And when I delegate, I can see how each person is voting, so I can tell if they're in alignment or not, and I can instantly change it if I don't like what they're doing. So, and then I can also delegate at the level of a particular proposal or challenge or set of topics. So what this allows for is fine-grained empowerment of expertise, ultimately. So if you think about how politics works now, we have representatives, and representatives are supposed to represent, like, 1 million people in the state of California. There's a representative. It's impossible, right? There's no way that they could actually represent all of those people's needs or perspectives or values or anything. And so when you kind of remove the idea of representation out of it, and you delegate to people based on their expertise, that they're doing what they're good at, and they're not doing it for you. They're not representing you. They're just doing it because that's what they do. And you can kind of check in on them and make sure you're aligned with values and that their expertise seems to be greater than yours on the topic. That's what allows for concentration of expertise. And again, it's just if I'm delegating everything on economics to Grace, but she's not so good at, whatever microeconomics or finance or some other topic, she might delegate to somebody else. And I would trust that that person would really be an expert, and my vote would flow from me to Grace and then on to who she delegates further to. So that's where the word liquid democracy comes from, is that delegation and trust sort of flows through these sort of trust networks. So when I think about the future of governance, it seems to me that we need to draw from expertise much more broadly. Right now, we have government appointees that are sort of appointed due to their connections with industry, or and usually they have lived lives that are very different from the majority of Americans, majority of people, and that would be true with every country. And so this allows for a broader gathering of ideas and perspectives. But it also kind of draws that balance where people who aren't experts and don't really know about a certain topic can find people that are, and that they trust, that their values aligned with. So for me, this solves a lot of the problems that we have with politicians or political structure with representatives who don't know really much about the topics that they're dealing with. They don't know about defense. They don't know about agriculture or anything. They just know politics and the positions of their parties. And so we're able to kind of bypass that whole structure and get to people who actually know things and empower them to make decisions. So this concept, when you apply it, it's kind of easy to understand when you apply it to like a government, but it also has interesting properties when you apply it to smaller organizations like businesses. So it empowers a very flat structure where there's just a bunch of people and they're working together and they're being delegated to and trusted by the group. It kind of like almost reduces the need for an HR department in some ways. I mean, you want to bring good people on board, but you want to also just have people there that people trust and that their values aligned with. So it creates this kind of amoeba-like structure. And of course, there can be, hybrid versions. Like in a business, you might still need an HR department. Like in a government, you would still need a judiciary branch, and you would still need probably an executive branch of some kind. But the legislative branch would be sort of taken over by the entire population. So you wouldn't have a Congress or a Senate. You'd have people suggesting things, and then a judicial branch to say, hey, is that legal? Is that fair? Does that stand by the Constitution? So you still need, things like constitutions and laws and things like that. It basically opens up the possibility for this crowdsourcing of decision making, and sense making. So in the past, governments typically use voting systems that are really outdated. By that, I mean the single choice voting system. And so with these sort of outdated voting systems, you have the potential for really bad decisions rising to the top. And I could talk a lot about the science there. But when you start to use the more scientifically and mathematically validated voting systems of ranked choice, not ranked choice like the one that is commonly used, but actually Condorcet methods. I could talk about that a lot, but it's basically a pairwise comparison. So looking at which one each person favored above each other one. The Condorcet method, approval voting, where you can check box each one that you think is a good option, and score voting, where you can give each option a score, like from 1 to 5 or -5 to +5 or 1 to 100, whatever. All of those are very powerful and mathematically appropriate voting methods that tend to reduce the problem of winner takes all and all of the other problems that we see, like bad ideas rising to the top, splitting the vote and all of those types of things. The idea is that when you have larger numbers of people, with a wide variety of perspectives, that you'll see the extremism reduce, and you'll see good ideas kind of rise up through the center to the top. So I'll pause for a minute and see if anybody has any questions about the general concept of liquid democracy. Okay.
Big fan of the concept.
So from my perspective, all of the problems that we're facing in the world, environmental problems and economic problems and war and inequality and, the risk of synthetic biology and, man-made pathogens and AI dominating over humanity and all those, social media, all these problems are solvable. There are solutions that are not being implemented. And the reason, of course, is that the governance systems, the coordination systems that we employ have a lot of perverse incentives baked into them. So people needing to spend 70% of their time campaigning, raising money so they can get the next election. And of course, that means getting money from people who have their own agendas, and then you're sort of beholden to their agenda. And then also this problem of representation, that these are popularity contests, they're not people with expertise, and they're representing too many people, and they're not able to focus on the topics that they're actually good at. So liquid democracy kind of solves all of those problems.
Yeah, and I just want to agree with what you're saying about elected officials and the incentives of that system, and also those that kind of seems a few more miles down the road to me. And my interest right now is kind of oh yeah, okay, where is this implemented, and how can it be demonstrated in real life? And I think a lot of the devil is in the details of the user experience of how it's
100%.
actually used and how people relate to it and understand it and engage with it.
100%.
I actually disagree that it can solve the problems. I think it's so gameable. People are going to buy and sell votes like crazy. If I don't care about a particular thing, like I don't care about education, but I do care about whatever gay rights or something, I'm going to sell my votes back and forth. I think it's very unlikely to work. And because again, who's good at something is a popularity contest. Again, I don't think that people's judgment, if I'm I'm completely ignorant about education, but that guy convinced me that he's good about it. I don't see how it solves the problems. So I understand why it's really appealing. My sense is that in many cases, it'll end up with even bigger polarization, because it's just a question of how much I'm willing to sell my vote for if I don't really care about that issue. And so the groups with the most money, that's where I'm concerned that
Yeah.
liquid democracy is gameable. Voting is always gameable, but liquid democracy makes the game more enticing to people who are extremists.
Well, let me answer both of those. I want to talk about the implementation issues, but I really want to address this with this position that Grace has. So the first is that the thing about our systems as we know them now, the representative systems, is that there's 480 representatives or something. So that's a very small number of people that you have to buy. Whereas if it's every single person in the country, it's pretty hard to game that. It's pretty hard to buy that many people. And because you're dealing with such a broad swath, like the entire population, you're going to have every sort of personality type there. And so, and you're going to have people that are, some that are willing to sell their vote, and you're going to have a lot of people that aren't. By definition, when you get into power in a representative democracy, you by definition are willing to sell your vote. That's what lobby and campaign finance is. So we have this incredibly small pre-selected group of ethically ambiguous people that are making the decisions for the entire population. And people that say, well, if I don't get in there, somebody else will, and they'll do it the other way. It's, I know I have to sell out to some degree to get anything done. With a liquid democracy, nobody has to sell anything. You just go in there and click, who you want to delegate to, or you make the decisions yourself. So of course, there are degrees of gameableness in almost anything, but that degree is pretty quantifiable. So for example, Condorcet method voting, the gameability of Condorcet method voting is extremely low. So, when you do single choice voting, you only get to choose one. And so it's always about the lesser of two evils. And it's never about who you actually want. I mean, it's already been gamed from the start. And, but when you can rank them, sequentially, or just rank them all from -5 to +5, like how much you dislike and how much you like, and then you run a Condorcet method on there, your attempt to strategize, to do strategic voting by, say, for example, putting all of your second favorites at the very bottom and only your most favorite at the top, for example, doesn't help you out, because it doesn't give all of those becomes option 2 instead of something other than that. And so you don't actually gain anything. You're better off to rank them as you actually feel about them. So this sort of gamification of voting is something that people think about and talk about a lot. And I have a video about this. So there are methods that just don't work. And that the worst offender is single choice voting, where you just checkbox a single one when there's several options. Whenever there's a polarizing question and there are more than one option, it won't tend to choose the best option. Score voting is actually somewhat sensitive to gaming. Like if you give your favorite option 5 stars and you give all of the other ones a -5, and enough people do that, you could have an impact on the outcome. But the good thing about score voting is that if you have a small group with a lot of trust, that nuance of how strongly you rank each option can add a lot of information to the outcome. So if people are being honest about how they feel about each option, you're more likely to come up with a better decision, as long as they aren't willing to game it. But in large groups where they're anonymous and they're low trust, it's better to use a voting method that's a little less sensitive to the nuance of how people vote. And so the Condorcet methods where you can rank them is extremely hard to game. So it's almost impossible to game. So you end up shooting yourself in the foot if you try to sort of not vote how you actually feel, strangely. So that kind of, does that give you any faith in the
I
possibility of
think it's
liquid
just
democracy?
like I would just go with James. Like we got to try it out and see under what
Yeah.
circumstances it work. And by the way, I do recommend Sam has like a whole series of different voting methodologies, and he totally geeks out. But he shows cool pictures in his video series, so it's like it's not as dry as how he explained it now, and it's just really
Uh,
like very useful work of like, oh, all these different voting methodologies. Yeah.
Thank you, Grace. Yeah, so and to both of your point, the experiment has not really been really well conducted. And so there's like the liquid feedback group from the Pirate Party in Germany and Denmark and those places. And there's the flowback group, which is working now in Sweden. And there have been a few other examples. And they've done some like academic work to show that people do delegate to people that have more expertise, that is like a tendency that people do actually have. But as far as like large scale success stories, there aren't really any. There's some small scale successes. And so the other major strategy for coordination comes actually from the original democracy, comes from ancient Greece, where they did sortition, which is where every citizen is sort of not forced, but strongly encouraged to put their name in to a random ballot to become the leader of some aspect of the city or whatever the organization is. And so you have these citizen assemblies of non-experts whose job is to coordinate amongst themselves and to gather the information they need and to make the decisions just as citizens, not as experts or anything like that. And there's been some research on that. And it turns out that this does surprisingly well. Citizen councils often end up coming up with better decisions than even when the groups are managed by experts, according to a lot of the research that I've seen. So I think part of the reason is that, these citizens have a generalist perspective, or they're not experts in the field. And so they're not sort of blindsided or biased towards specific positions. They can gather information from experts, and so they're able to kind of weigh different perspectives, different positions on the topic that they're facing. And that kind of like beginner's mind probably has some benefit, I would imagine. So, and these two methods don't have to be exclusive. So you can have sort of like a Twitter-like discussion about like a shadow government, which is sort of like what happens in Taiwan, where you have this sort of running polling and where you can sort of filter your vote and filter the conversation by certain types of experts. Oh, I'd like to hear what economists have to say about this. Click. And so that Twitter-like discussion feed gets filtered by people who have some kind of expertise in economics. And you say, okay, let's hear what the environmentalists have to say. Click. And now you can you see how that runs. And then as you delegate, what you might find is that people are empowered in a given conversation, and there might be several people, and they might have very different positions. And so that a platform could catalyze a conversation, like a debate, not a like who's going to win type debate, but like how do we make sense of this type of debate, like a dialectical debate amongst the people who are most representing or best sort of embodying the perspectives of the various perspectives that are out there. And so that kind of sense-making process could be happening in parallel to just random people actually making the decisions. So there's a lot of ways this could be done. You can have many variations on that, like stable bodies of experts. So consider everybody with a public health degree or who has worked for, say, 3 years in some kind of a public health arena, all of those people being admitted to an organization that has to make decisions about public health, in the United States, for example, or in the world or whatever. And so the problem that you often hear is that when you have a bunch of experts, it's like, these people aren't living the problem, they're up in their ivory towers and
Sam,
they're
I want to see Forby. Can we see Forby? Like we could go on this philosophical rant for a long time, but can we see Forby now?
yes, we
I'm
can
sorry
see.
I asked a question that made you go off on your like area of expertise because I want to see Forby.
Well, let me finish my thought there. But the idea, and then we'll give a little demo. So, and we have maybe another 20 minutes. So the idea here is that you could delegate so some of these people with public health degrees would be single mothers and, have disabilities and have ethnicities and have, different lives, not like people who are, being chased by the pharmaceutical industry. These would be people working in, hospitals and all those places. So they would live the embodied experience of dealing with public health issues, and some of them would have areas of research and blah blah blah. So delegating to this body, this sort of liquid democratic body, or this body of experts, whatever their decision would be on any topic like COVID or whatever, you could delegate to that, for example. So that's another way that liquid democracy could be used. And okay, any questions about any of that before I switch gears?
Yeah, I've got a ton of questions, but we can do the 4B thing first, because I am interested in that too.
I'm going to share my screen. Okay, here's my family. And by the way, the UI is really undergoing a lot of changes. So this is my family. We're making decisions about where we're going to go for the summer, the Cyclitz family summer reunion. So here's the decidables here: entrepreneur ideas for Theo, summer reunion, green taxi, things that we're interested in, and we're planning this summer reunion here. So this is a vote, and so that means there's a lot of sense-making stuff going on in the background. And so there's a chat here, and so this is like a WhatsApp type chat, and here are some options. So we're going to get thinking about getting some RVs and traveling around and visiting friends, or we're thinking about some cabins, or staying at Ben's, or going to Japan instead, or staying at Dad's. So these are all options, and people are voting on these. If you look within an option, then what you have is reasons for or against it. So when I vote, I'm using this +5 -5 scale, and when I vote, I can give a reason to explain why I'm in favor or against. Now, these reasons can be prioritized by the members, and so we can see what people really care about, and that helps to develop better options. So you can start to see what people really want. Aspects are how to compare these options by another aspect. So when you say which is the cheapest, now you can rank each of these options by the cost. And so when I vote here, I'm saying I think this is the cheapest. So I'm not casting a vote for this. I'm just saying I think it's the cheapest. So now you can rank all the options, and so now you can start to see how the community thinks about the cost. And we could do the same thing about which would be the most fun. And so the cabins and PEI, I think the RVs would be the most fun. So this would be a +5. And I think staying at Dad's place would probably be kind of like a root canal. So I'll put that over there. And now I can look at this and I can see, how people think about which is the most fun and which is the most expensive, which is the cheapest. And that might change my vote as far as how I actually want to vote. So this is kind of like the sense-making process. So trying to understand, and if you can imagine this at a larger scale, so here's the communities. This is a little slow to load, and I know exactly why. We're working on that. So this is like an example of a project that Grace and I are kind of working on, where we're using 4B as a disaster control system. So a system where people can start to make decisions about how to manage a problem, like a disaster, and how to coordinate, using it for coordination. So you can just start to see that these, it has a lot of different uses. And you can imagine also, like in a country where the decisions are much more impactful, or in a city where there are options. You often see proposals, in the government and in DAO space and other places, where the proposal comes out of the blue, sort of apropos of nothing. In 4B, you have to create a container for it, like a vote, and then that gives a place for people to give alternate options. And so that would sort of solve a lot of the corruption problems. Plus, it's all transparent. So this is how it looks, basically. And there's a lot of work being done, but you can kind of get an idea. Prioritizing humanity's greatest challenges. So here's a vote, just trying to see what people think about the problems that we're facing as humanity: global misinformation, AI alignment and control, soil degradation, synthetic biologies, ethical and health paradoxes, resource competition and inequality, environmental degradation. So these are all sort of challenges, personal development and community. So people have added these, public health and pandemics. And so you can kind of, if there was a large community, which there isn't yet because we're really just starting, you could start to see how strongly the community feels about each of these, like which of these are the main priorities of the community. And then you could start to create proposals on how to manage these things and develop plans. And so if you have experts and you have people who have a lot of knowledge and experience contributing, and then you can start to see them chatting, you can delegate to them, and good ideas start to bubble up, through the process. And you have the sense making process where you're looking at reasons for or against a given option, people using that to create better options. You start to develop better plans that have also the legitimacy of large numbers of people in a sort of a social media setting. And then those people can coordinate to, interact with legislature or to take on initiatives directly. Sort of that's where we want this to head. And so it's a tough road to go from, sort of a startup or a nonprofit to taking over social media and the government for that matter. That's kind of what we're trying to do. So, yeah. Grace, is that a good enough walkthrough? Did I miss anything that you would like to see?
No, I think it's good. I mean, it's an opening for people to give feedback.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're welcome to go in there and just muck about. It's a closed beta, but it's actually open. So if you're going to go in there, just realize that it's constantly changing, and your data probably won't get lost, but it'll look ugly at least for a while. The back end is really solid, and we're just sort of cleaning up the front end quite a bit.
It's actually not bad at all. There's some features that don't work perfect, but it's still really easy to use. And if you wanted to come in where we'd love people to role play with us in this disaster scenario and hang out and
Right.
pretend you're a concerned citizen and post something as if you're a concerned citizen. But you'll need to be invited to that particular board, looking for people to play with the interface and pretend that they're in our unfortunately flooded Creekside city, whatever I called it.
Yeah. And that'll inform also the, some future directions and stuff. So please join us for that fun disaster, hopefully. And Tanner, you had questions.
Lots of questions and comments. First, I guess I'm just wondering if there's any incentive for governments to actually apply this. Like, where would that be coming from?
None. No perverse incentive. There are no perverse incentives. In fact, on a system like this, there is no such thing as a politician. And, politicians are the people who sort of win through the perverse incentive structure. And so then they, kind of say, well, it must be okay because I got in, right? So, it can't be all bad. And so the only incentive, of course, is non-perverse. And so people saying, wow, we need a better coordination system. Let's try this. But the way it would make its way in is that in the city, I don't know where you all live. I actually live in Amsterdam, Netherlands. And so, if the city of Amsterdam, if enough people got onto the platform and started to coordinate, and they said, okay, well, we can actually elect the official that we want, and we can run their campaign. Okay, let's run their campaign and let's elect them. And then this person gets in and they say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to open up this platform so that all the citizens have easy access with their DigiD, verified citizenship, software documentation stuff. And now everybody can just go in and they can vote or they can delegate. And you get a prompt and say, hey, I noticed you haven't voted for anything. Why don't you just delegate to a family member who is someone you trust? And that way we can get an approximation of what you care about. So we can start to really see how the citizenry, what they actually care about. And so you start to get this tighter and tighter approximation of the values and the concerns of the people. And then you have a process where better and better solutions are being found. So synergistic satisfiers, ways that solve these problems and those problems, because you're going to have disparate perspectives. You're going to have the sort of the populist people, and you're going to have the, the extreme progressives, in there as well. And like me. So.
Well, populist
And so-
isn't the opposite of progressive, by the way. Populist means
True.
nationalist, and I don't think there's anything wrong with people wanting their government to defend their national interests. I think that's what we have governments for. So,
For sure,
But-
sure. Very
Yeah.
true. Thank you. And believe me, I'm all over the board. I'm, and I have family
Yeah.
members who are like full on QAnon.
all
So
over the
let's,
board. Yeah, we got it all. But I think one
Yeah.
of the things that we came up with in our scenarios was also in this disaster scenario, that we're creating a little game around, like, and the mayor realizes that she's got to get on the platform because that's where everybody's talking about the emergency services. And in our like
Yeah.
fantasy scenario that we were making up, like really quickly people understand that there is some government money coming in, but most of the money is coming in from nonprofit, and they hold an election about who's going to manage the nonprofit money that comes in, and the mayor doesn't win, right? So like you could
Yeah.
imagine that scenario quite easily. And now the mayor's really got to kiss up to everybody and, get used to this new situation in which this parallel thing is happening in a
Right.
disaster
Shadow government.
scenario. It's right, like a disaster is really possible. And then I happen to be living in a region right now where there was a huge town hall meeting that just occurred, and there's huge problems with the water and with the sewage here. And then again, you could imagine people using this platform and saying, hey, instead of paying our taxes, let's pool our taxes and fix the fire hydrants. And, that
Yeah,
level of
they're leaking.
civil disobedience, like how many people would have to
Mhm.
get to that level of civil disobedience before the mayor would have to kiss up to you, right? Like it's interesting.
Right, but it starts to create the possibility of where human coordination could vie on the power on the Machiavellian power on the real politics scale, and so I'm encouraged by that, and I think someone's got to do it. Hey, Tanner, I feel like you had more questions. Keep them coming. I don't know if we answered your question.
Yeah, I think I just tried to sum it up as that like liquid democracy or your platform, like the 4B platform, incentivize and makes parallel institution building easier because it's not going to work in current institutions. Basically, it's just because there's no
No, right,
incentive.
right. Not unless you can use it to vote somebody in who will do the will of the platform. And then the next step would be for them to create laws where you would require that politicians do the will of the people. So you can think about it like this. We've had democracy for 2 or 3 thousand years, right? We've had the technology to collect and develop and prioritize the ideas, needs, perspectives of large groups of people for maybe 50 years. But why in those 50 years have we gone to the moon and created synthetic, cloned people and all these other things, but we haven't figured out a technology to collect and develop and prioritize the will of the people and the ideas and perspectives? And, why has that never happened? We all know why. Okay. And this is kind of what you're alluding to here, Tanner, is that the landscape just is not in alignment with that. It really, you saw that study by Yale where they said, here's the chance of it should be a line where the chance of when the more people like something, the higher the chance of it happening. But it's absolutely flat. But then when you go and you look at the more the donor class likes something, it's almost a straight line. It's not quite, but it's pretty high. So, I mean, it's very clear that we don't live in a democracy. We live in an oligarchy, plutocracy. It's basically ruled by donation.
The other comment I had on that is that what if the current system, like obviously it's ruled by money, but what if you kind of just change the perverse incentive structure with things like campaign finance laws and actually anti-lobbying laws?
Yeah.
Because what it seems to me is that like representative democracy, it's kind of the same thing as liquid democracy in the sense that you're delegating trust to a politician and he puts in his cabinet of experts, and if they're not doing a good job like appointing those experts, then you can vote the politician who's assigning those things. But because there's so much perverse capital and power incentives to like corrupt those things, what I'm trying to say is a similar point to Grace, is that I think the people that have wealth and power will gamify anything. So the perverse incentive structure. I'm not trying to defend representative democracy versus these things. I'm just saying that's still
No,
the
no, no.
root cause.
Well. So, I think kind of this to your point and also to Grace is that there are structures that are easier to game than others just by the nature of it. The math of voting systems, single choice voting is super easy to game. Whereas, score voting is harder and approval voting is even harder and Condorcet methods are really hard. And it's the same thing, so you have a politician, their job is to, bring in cabinet members who are experts, but it's just one expert, right? And that expert, I might appoint that expert based on somebody donating to me, right? And now we have an industry insider. We have a revolving door situation now. And because it's only one expert, right? But when you broaden, I think we can think of it like this, like when we had, the Akkadian Empire, one of the first, off with their heads empire, like we had one person that could kill anybody they wanted. They could just take whatever they wanted, kill whatever kill anybody, do it, decide anything. And then, it became less and less so. Now you had a court, and then you had a set of nobles, and then you had a set of representatives. And if you just keep following this path, you eventually get to the point where power is evenly distributed. Maybe not evenly, but distributed broadly enough, and not based on like political alliances and, wealth, but based on actual know-how, like actual experience, like actually being good at something, So it's kind of just the natural progression. I mean, it seems to me. And
I mean,
Well,
I think about
I
this in
hope
a different
this is
way.
going that way, but yeah.
Like
Go ahead.
this is a very much a Horizon 1 solution. Like it's something you can use right now. Maybe can get to Horizon 2 and maybe even Horizon 2 Plus, but it's not a Horizon 3 solution. The perverse incentive is built into the monetary system. Just a system in which there's certain things that are worth money and certain things that are not worth money, and there's some sort of random and destructive decision about that, right? Like it's a very clearly destructive decision. And this system is not, like the 4B system is not designed to fix that, but it is designed
right.
as a citizen,
But
involvement. It's not, I don't think it looks that deep into that sort of thing.
it doesn't, because what it is, it doesn't specifically, because the concept is that all of these problems are ultimately coordination problems. But I'm so appreciative of the thinking that you do around this, Grace. And one of the things that the perspective that I have on that is that it's going to require a dramatic shift in consciousness for people to start to actually value the tree more alive than dead, or to be able to have a really good sense-making process about what trees can we cut and what can't we? Like, how can we solve our problems with the minimal impact? I love this saying, I forget who said it, but, it was Hansi Freina. He said, like communism is a great idea. Just everybody work to the best of their ability and everybody get what they need. And the problem is that there aren't any communists. Very few people actually are going to be like down with that or even understand that. Most people are just wired to kind of maximize their personal gains
I
and
think
to
that's
sort of.
absolutely incorrect. And you
I
have
hope you're
evidence
right.
of it everywhere. Like the
I
evidence
hope
is
you're
clear that that's not what people do.
well.
It's
I
it's
agree. I
obvious. I mean,
agree.
we're all
Actually,
sitting here not doing it, right?
this is true. This is true.
Yeah, it's
But
absolutely
but
evident.
but
Yeah.
you're right. But what happened in China was that there were inevitably power struggles, right?
Right.
Mao and
Because it was the problem with communism was thinking that some centralized authority was going to decide that for people based
right,
on
exactly.
one algorithm or another, and somehow it was going to be uncorruptible. The problem wasn't with the concept, and the problem wasn't with human nature. The problem was with
Right,
human nature when you start to give people control over other people. If
right.
you start, right,
So
and
it's
then what kind of people
right.
will seek that control and what happens to when you
Yes,
get it, right? And that's where
exactly.
it's not about most people aren't enlightened enough, like really
I
honestly.
agree. I need to totally change my argument about that. You're 100% right. And that's actually what I believe. And that's why the power structure needs to be as incorruptible as possible. We still need to coordinate. That's the problem. We have an impact at a global scale. And if a small group of people say, you know what, I just want to burn coal and, the mercury, it's not my problem. It's going to go up into the air. The solution to pollution is dilution. Somebody has to say, okay, no, we need to be able to coordinate at the level that we impact things. And so that coordination involves, by nature, some degree of force. So you have to say, no, you can't. You can't do that. I'm sorry, you can't just go around, raping and pillaging. Sorry, and so that power needs to be wielded and in a way that's broadly distributed, so it can't concentrate. Because when you have a concentration of power, then you have the Stalins and the Maos and the Pol Pots and the people that are gonna they're gonna figure out what they need to say to get into that position.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
always that tendency.
I think we all
And
agree on
so
that.
yeah. And so again, like the problem of it circles back for me, in my mind, it circles back, the economic problems that you're describing circle back to coordination problems. And they circle back to people being able to make decisions about how to avoid those multipolar traps. It's like the concept of the multipolar trap. It's like that tree, if I don't cut it down, somebody else is going to cut it down. And then they're going to have an economic advantage over me, and they're going to be able to buy more employees and cut even more trees. It's better if I cut it. And so that like multipolar trap where everybody is thinking this way and deciding that they're going to cut down every tree they possibly can, those people end up being the Dutch or the British or taking over the world, or you know what I mean? Because they just cut down more trees and built more boats and just went out and stole more stuff. I mean, that's a multipolar trap incentive landscape run amok, right? Gone to the extreme. So the way to get around that is, in my mind, coordination, like saying, hey, we need national parks. In fact, the whole world needs to be like a national park, and we need to selectively harvest things specifically for specific needs and figure out how to make our impact as minimal as possible. And, when we fish, it needs to be done in a certain way so that we can reseed the fish populations. And like, those are coordination problems. And like, we need to feed people, and we need houses, and we need, people need to feel secure. But how can we meet those needs in a coordinated way that is not, going to concentrate power and attract the psychopaths and sociopaths of the world? So to me, that's what liquid democracy is. Like, understanding how voting works. It sucks, but there are ways to do it that minimize the likelihood of it being gamified. Similarly with concentration of power. Concentration of power sucks, but there are ways to do it that will minimize the tendency for psychopaths and sociopaths to take over and the concentration of power to start to snowball into more and more dysfunctional decisions being made, and et cetera, et cetera. So to me, that's how I see it.
I had another question, just to change the subject a little bit, about well, not really a question, but I feel like we need to tie in a lot of public education into this, because I don't think there's any guarantee necessarily that the public is going to be more informed on issues and vote for the experts than politicians, probably, but I don't know the answer to that.
Well, I had a great discussion about this, and it's an unlisted video, and if you reach out to me, I'll send you it, but where we talked about this, and it's a very long discussion, but we talk about this sort of liquid democracy or a system like 4B actually being an educational system and how it would work that way. And so I'll send you that. But the gist of it, as I can quickly pull it up, is that you have access to so many perspectives, and you can filter and sort it, and you can see a lot of different ideas, and you can see how different people with expertise and different experiences vote on each of those perspectives, right? Each of those options. You can ask somebody what they think, and they'll give you their opinion, but it's really hard to see in aggregate how a large volume of people feel or think about something. And so to be able to give them the power to say, okay, from negative like 5, like the worst thing you could, that's so stupid, I can't even believe it, to +5, like that's the best idea I've ever heard. How do you feel about this idea? And so you start to aggregate a large volume of people, and then they start to give reasons for or against why they voted that way, et cetera. So you start to become informed about the perspectives of other people, and that you might not encounter in your daily life. And you're forced to think about integrative solutions. Like, okay, a bunch of people care about that. Wow, and a bunch of people care about that. Okay, how about this? Does this solve both of those problems? And, so it becomes very easy and interesting. I mean, Twitter is fun and interesting. You go on there and you can, select for people that you like, or Facebook or whatever, Instagram for that matter. But Twitter in particular, because it's built for conversation, replies to replies to replies, it actually has real conversation embedded in its structure. And so you can follow people and see what they say about things and see how people respond to it and stuff. But it's just talk. When you add the element of, okay, what about this then? Let's do this. Oh, and then you can filter and say, oh, how did, Jamie Wheel, how did Grace Rachmani feel about this one? There, she commented. Okay, I think, oh, that's interesting. Okay, wow. And et cetera. Or I can, if she's open to delegation, I can just click and say, delegate to you. And then I can actually see how you're voting if you're so bold.
I got to go to my next thing,
Yes,
but
yes.
I just don't want to run off without saying goodbye.
So thanks, Grace. Thanks for being such a fit disturber. It's much appreciated as always. And looking forward to more discussions. And thanks, Tanner, for being so engaged. And just reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm just happy to discuss this stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, I put my email in the chat, so you can, if you want to send that video, that would be really interesting to watch it.
And thanks, everybody.
Good to meet you guys.